Hello, this is Ken Quigley from Keystroke, and today's webinar is on how to run through the Qsales setup with an existing database. So the objective of this is to run through the full Qsales setup, not the installation, but the configuration, so that when you're done, you've linked your existing ACT contacts with your QuickBooks customers, and then we'll bring in all the data and we'll have a database that's fully set up, loaded up with transactional data. So let's get started with the install wizard. So I'm going to click on Tools within ACT. I'm going to scroll down to the very bottom option, and I'm going to say Qsales for ACT Wizard, ACT Install Wizard. Now in this case, I'm going to select existing ACT database because as you can see, I've got a list of ACT customers here. Now, if you don't want this wizard appearing every single time you launch, then make sure that you select this checkbox. Next, the Qsales admin settings. This is really important because the information you're going to put in here is going to ensure the proper connection to the API so that you can connect to QuickBooks. So let's click on the Qsales admin settings. Now you have to be a QuickBooks administrator to set this up, okay? Not QuickBooks, sorry, ACT administrator. So the first thing is the Qsales API URL. Now, at this point, you've already set up the Qsales API, whether you're using the server API or the personal API. That setup and configuration is part of a separate webinar, but we would only get into configuring the plugin once that process is done. So let's bring that onto screen. We've set up, for purposes of this demo, the personal API, okay? So I'm going to click on copy. So this address will be brought on over here. Okay, obviously this is a bogus one, and I'm going to paste this in here. And now I'm going to put in the password. Now, what is the password, you ask? Well, the password is not something that you have to, dig up someplace. This is the password that you assigned the Qsales API when you were creating and setting up the Qsales API, which, as I said, we covered in a separate webinar. So in this case, I've just simply taken it from, because I created elsewhere, pasted it in here, and now I'm going to click on Get API Version. Now this indicates, oh, hold on, I got to click on Save first. Okay, now I'm going to click on here, and now I'm going to click on Get API. So I had to save these settings. Now it's saying that this address is valid, and it's giving me the version number. Okay, so that's good. Now, you're probably wondering what the login to QuickBooks and log out of QuickBooks is. The Qsales API is always running, and it's always logged into the QuickBooks database. If you need to be in QuickBooks single user mode, whether or not, sometimes if you want to make chart of account changes, you want to merge customers, some of those functions can only be done in single user mode. So what we've done is we've created the option of logging out of QuickBooks and logging into QuickBooks, so you don't actually have to stop the API, okay? And you're able to do this right from the plugin, okay? Now next, we've confirmed that the API is working. We've got all the address information. Now we're going to click on the transaction sync settings. As the name would imply, this is the information, the transactions that we will be syncing to QuickBooks, okay? So I generally tell people, do not sync what's called non-posting transactions, things like estimates, things like purchase orders, and things like pending invoices, because they, you've got to pair off something, so why not pair off transactions that don't contribute to balances, that don't contribute to income and expense reports, that are basically there as placeholders, okay? So I've cleared all of these. Link transactions to companies, yes, okay? Payments, sales taxes, of course, you want to have the complete picture. Auto link companies to contacts, yes. Enable auto link for jobs. We don't personally use jobs, but if you do and your industry requires it, it makes sense. Jobs are basically a sub-entity under nested under customers. So if you are a company that may have a number of jobs with a particular customer, like building maintenance, things like that, a number of different sites, and you want to analyze your profit and loss, your expenses, your revenue on a job-by-job basis, then you can break down, subdivide that customer into a number of different jobs, okay? And, as I said, this is not a Qsales feature. This is something that Qsales supports of the QuickBooks feature. First name, last name, include individual contact sync data, include the contact email fields, include name and descriptions of the items, and then include custom field syncs, okay? QuickBooks to Act and Act to QuickBooks. Okay, so then we've got 1825. What is that? That is exactly 5 years in days. Now, the reason that we start off with 5 years is that the QuickBooks data tab that we will create later actually displays 5 years by default, okay? So this is really reflecting your initial import. And the reason that we put this in admin settings is we don't want each and every single administrator selecting different transaction types, because then it will create incomplete data based on who's importing it, okay? So we set that at the admin level. But, that information now, we've got 5 years. And as I said, 5 years is because by default, the QB data tab displays 5 years worth of data. If you want to get more, we've been in business 27 years. If you want to have a broader angle view, that's fine. Just be mindful that when you do your initial import, more is more. It will take longer, okay? So then we're going to click on miscellaneous. It contains 2 options. One, force all new transactions to be created as pending. I mentioned pending, that we don't include those in terms of bringing them over from QuickBooks, but if you have subcontractors, employees, things like that, that you're going to empower to create transactions inside of Qsales so they appear in QuickBooks, you may want to have that one last stage of approving, whether you or your accounting team, you as the business owner, before something gets sent out, okay? Maybe you want to make sure that the invoice is formatted correctly, it contains all the information, tax information is correct. You never know when you're dealing with subcontractors, their responsibility is to account for their time, which is a different responsibility than maybe making sure that the invoice is completely valid. So we set it up so that if you check this box, anyone that creates a transaction, whether it's a sales receipt or an invoice or what have you, inside of Qsales will appear in QuickBooks as a pending transaction that you can fully or convert into a full transaction as you see fit, okay? The past due alert, this is important because this, we have a little green bar or red bar up here. It's not visible in list view, where it will display if the customer has an overdue balance, so that users don't inadvertently create an unnecessary credit risk with customers that haven't already paid their bills, okay? So the question is, at what point do you want to alert your users of that overdue balance? Is it $50, which is the default, or does your industry dictate that that number should be higher or lower? This is where you would change that. Now we click on permission settings. Now, why do we have permission settings? Well, in previous iterations of QuickBooks, you used to have one Act user linked directly to one QuickBooks user. So in that setup, you did not have to have any kind of QuickBooks security, because that user, that Act user, would be subject to whatever permissions that QuickBooks user had that he was linked to. Well, there are no more Act user to QuickBooks user linkage, because all the Qsales users in Act access the accounting data through one QuickBooks user. So because of that, we need to have a different setup to control what permissions each of those users have available to them. So by default, the permissions are read-only. Obviously, with an admin, we're going to want to change that. I'm going to show you how to do that. So we click on Edit, and in admin, we're going to select full. So we have full read-write permissions, but also just to review the custom, where you can select someone, and these are all multi-select, so you can select create transactions, edit transactions, and then also view transactions navbar. What is that? Why did we add that? Well, that is down here, the QB transaction. This was one of the things that we added first with Quickbook or with Qsales version 12.1. And what we thought would be that business owners or sales managers would really want to have a global view of the business revenue so that they can do reports and get, really a top level view of the entire book of business. The problem with that is that obviously that for business owners may be sensitive to exposing that kind of data to all Qsales users, especially in cases where you're dealing with subcontractors that may also want to have access to that. So you may not want to show a full picture of all your revenue because that's sensitive accounting information. So I'm going to select full for myself as the admin, but I wanted to show you that if you deselect this as a custom user, this QB transaction option will disappear. Okay, we're going to click on save. And then the final tab is remote database settings. Now, remote database settings is an option where if you have your master database hosted, you can select one of the remote databases to be the Qsales master. I'm not going to get into the minutia of it, but you can actually complete certain functions on an RDB or less functions on an RDB than you can on the master database. However, this feature allows you to assign a particular RDB to be the Qsales master database. Okay, it doesn't elevate its ACT status, but it elevates how Qsales interacts with it as a master or an RDB. So that's where you would select this, and then there'll be certain new functions that would be available to an RDB that wouldn't otherwise be available. So I'm going to click on save. Okay, and now I'm going to click on next. So the admin settings are complete. Now we're going to click on next, and we're going to click on the QuickBooks build fields. Now, the Qsales adds a lot of fields to the database, not just contact table fields, but also opportunity fields and several custom table fields, okay, or custom tables, I should say. Now, with that, let's review. The two rows here, contact fields, company fields, custom tables, opportunity fields, the top four should absolutely be selected, okay? The only reason you wouldn't select company fields is if you absolutely don't use the company table. Not to be confused with the company field in the contact table, but the linked company table. But by default, every single user should select these top four. The last one is optional. And what that will do is that will create those fields in the QB data tab that will give you a summary view of the last 5 years, okay? Last 5 years, including the current one. So if you don't want to have that, or you're saying, well, maybe I don't need it because my business is new, it's only been around for 3 years, I don't need that. Well, obviously that is going to change in time, and you don't want to be wiping out your data, okay, to provide support for 4 and 5 years once it becomes relevant. So you may as well create it now. Now this process will take normally about 5.5 minutes. And after about 5.5 minutes, it will show you it's complete. In this case, we've already created the field, so it's only going to take about 10 seconds. That's done. Now, I should tell you that in case now it's going to close the wizard. Normally, I'd have to restart ACT, but I don't have to because I already know that those fields were created. Okay. Now, the next stage is mapping. Now, let me just back up. If you restart ACT after creating those fields and you get an error message saying that, please run it again, you'll return to that process, click on the build fields, it will be done, restart it. And then if you don't get that error message, then you know that all the fields were created successfully, okay? I have not seen it take more than 2 times to complete. Most times it's done in 1. Don't be alarmed, it's just 1 extra reboot and we'll get done, okay? So now we click on set mapping. What is mapping? Well, as you know, we are going to be syncing data, okay, the fields in terms of addresses, company names, contact names, phone numbers, emails, things like that. All of that field data is going to be passed back and forth, okay, through the linking, creating new customers, updates back and forth. So we have to have a mapping of where those fields from the source are going to end up in the destination, okay, in the destination database. So in this case, this is where the mapping information is. By default, you're going to see some cases where all of these things are unmapped. We've generally found that when you click on reset to defaults, that will take care of everything. If you are a Canadian or UK customer and you're linking to states, you may want to make sure that the province and postal code are linked appropriately, okay? But this is all completed. You've got the ability to detect additional custom fields within QuickBooks, so you can map those. That's up to you for the purpose of this demo. We're going to skip past this process, okay? Now we're going to click on next, and this is where we actually create the layout, okay? This layout process is incredibly fast. We've rewritten it to use custom table technology for importing in layouts. So we're going to click on install QB, okay? QB tab, current layout. You can select a different layout if you like, okay? I'm going to say, let's select the, let's select this one. Okay, now the reason I selected the layout is it's now going to create a Qsales version with a little underscore QB at the very end of it. Okay, company, oh, I selected company layout. Let me just do that again. Misfired. Contact layout. Okay. Okay, so I've already created this one, so I'm going to create basic contact layout. Let's actually go with the web layout here. Okay, here's the web just so we can see it change. Add. Okay, contact layout premium underscore QB was created. Now I'm going to click on next. Now, here is where most of the work will take place. So customer, link, and sync. Now, obviously, we've got different processes for customer and vendor because unlike in ACT, QuickBooks separates them in separate tables. So we're going to click on link and sync. Now, because we selected at the beginning of this wizard that we have an existing database, we ended up in this tab. If we'd selected differently, we would have ended up in this tab. We have a separate video for how to create a new database from QuickBooks. But for this one, what we're going to do is we're going to set the matching fields, okay, where we're matching, trying to link the ACT contacts with the corresponding QuickBooks contacts. And obviously, one of the best fields to use in terms of uniqueness is the emails. You can use company as well. The problem is that you may have 5 or 6 contacts, maybe more in a database that matches a single corresponding customer in QuickBooks. So you may not want to have all of that information duplicated across all of those contacts and want to just have one. Now, keep in mind that it doesn't download more data. You won't get extra transactions. They will just be visible under more. And then you're going to have to run a separate process to indicate which of those company contacts is the primary one, and that's for reporting purposes. That's part of a separate webinar we'll get into later. Okay, so now all we've got to do, since we're selecting the QB email, I'm just going to say email here to this email. I'm going to then say, let's link the load the unlinked customers. Now I've got them all. Okay, you can see them here. So these are my initial linked contacts. And now what I want to do is I want to process these. Now at this stage, all that's happening is we're linking them. And I'm going to show you how that information looks when it's done. So I'm going to click on process. Very fast, okay, because we're not actually really transferring much data. So we're going to click on close. Now, normally I would click on next and run the manual sync, but I want to actually show you how this information is looking. Okay, so I want to go to here, and you can see here that I've got the transaction or the QB ID. This particular field is what is linking to the corresponding QuickBooks. Okay, it's identified this as the customer name, and the record type is customer versus job. Okay, now I've got this set up so you can see that these linkage. Let's see, out of all of the, let's do a lookup of all the contacts. Got 57. If I was to say how many have an internal ID, we can just simply say contains data, and we've got 51. So we've linked 51 out of the 57 customers, which is not bad. It's not to say that we've missed any. It just means that that was how many that we could match through the email address. Okay, so now that we've established that the proper linking has taken place, we can see that there is no transactions here. No transactions being downloaded because all we've completed is the linking process. So let's get to the importing. So you can click it here and go directly down to the install wizard and then advance through to the last tile, or we can just simply go straight to the Qsales for Act Import. Now, as you can see, some of the preferences that I had selected in the admin settings are here. Okay, so I've got estimates and POs cleared, and I see 1825 going back 5 years. You can see I've got current year, 1, 2, 3, 4 on top of that, so 5 years in total, so 1825. Couple of things I'm going to recommend that we do in advance. By the way, in the event, if you wanted to rebuild your fields, set the mapping, okay, you've got those 2 setup fields available here again, and then load metadata. What's load metadata? For your purposes, all we need to do is understand that this will allow Qsales to recognize some of the drop-down menus from QuickBooks. So we're going to click on here. Takes about 5 seconds. Now, if you ever needed to do this again, to complete wipe out all of the data, then you can click on Clear Data and go through the steps. It takes like 1 or 2 extra mouse clicks, and that will wipe out all the transactional data, okay? Just in case you want to do it again, it may just be that there's some concern about the data corruption. You can wipe out and reload very, very easily. We've set this up so that it actually writes directly, does the erase command directly to SQL, so the process is incredibly fast, even if you have tens of thousands of records. So then the next is sync items. In QuickBooks parlance, this means products. So we're going to click on sync items because we need to have the products there in our database. QSync, which is the nightly version of the importing, okay, will load the metadata and ensure that you do the syncing the items each and every single time. But for the first transaction, which we're about to do, we want to make sure that all those things are in place. So the data is fully recognized when it's done. So we've set all of these parameters up, okay? And we're going to select transaction sync now. And it says this may take several hours. In most cases, that's true. In our case, it's going to take 1 to 2 minutes because we only have 51 customers linked, and each of them have between 1 and 5 or 6 transactions. So this won't take that long. So let's click on yes, and it's going to display the progress down here. So you're going to see 1, 2 as it advances through, and it will progress fairly quickly. Okay. Now, as this is going through, again, I want to remind everyone that it is running through the Qsales API. Okay, so you can see that this Start Qsales API is grayed out. So this is active. It's an active connection to your QuickBooks, and it is bringing all of that information over. You can see here, I've got QuickBooks open. Here, if I'm using the personal API, it is allowing me to share a single login between the API and QuickBooks so that I can have the API logged in and the QuickBooks user logged in, which saves the actual user from having to buy a dedicated license for Qsales. which is really, really important because depending on which version you have, we have the enterprise version that can get really, really expensive. Okay, so just be mindful of that. If you are a small team, 1 to 5 users, then you definitely want to make sure that you're using the personal API, which will save you a lot of money. Okay. Otherwise, if you have a bigger deployment and you've got 3, 4, 5 or more QuickBooks users, then it will make sense to pay for a dedicated license and use the server API, because at that point you can do almost everything inside of Qsales that you can do with ACT. So I can tell you that we personally saved $4,000 a year by having the number of QuickBooks users that we were previously paying for. And because we were using enterprise, we basically went from 10 down to 5 users. And as I said, save $4,000 in subscription fees. Needless to say, a fraction of that would pay for all of your Qsales licenses. Okay, so that's done. As you can see, that took about a minute, maybe 2. Now we're going to click on OK, and we're going to click on Close. And now we can see that all of the data has refreshed into these summaries. So let's see what that, here's the summary fields. And let me just expand this so you can see all the fields available. Okay, this particular person, as you can see here, has 2 transactions, both within 2022. So we can see here that we've got the transactions here and the transaction here from 2022. Nothing prior to that. So it's year-to-date sales. They've past due because there's no payment applied to it. Total balance, balance from 0 to 30. And then it's showing you the last invoice, the first invoice. So, if you're an ACT user and you've got access to Qsales, it might be very difficult to understand how long you've been doing business with that particular customer, except with Qsales, you can see it in an instant. You can see the lifetime sales amount with this particular customer. In this case, it's a fairly short lifespan, so it's not difficult to calculate. But if you've been dealing with someone for years, that can be a really, really important bit of information to understand the total lifetime value of that customer. And then the average sale amount. Okay, so now these are all the fields that get populated here. Now it's also important to understand that unlike other programs, all of these values here are tabulated from the QuickBooks transactions themselves. Nothing is being copied from QuickBooks into these fields. These fields are all calculated and are actual summaries based on the QB transactions here. So that's, as you update these will get updated. So for instance, if you created a transaction within Qsales, it would automatically pop up here and you would see updates to the QB data tab. No other program provides that level of interaction, okay? So now we've got that, and let's consider where we have traveled during this brief webinar. We started off with a completed database and a QuickBooks database. We have now linked them all, and we have downloaded all the transactions, and we have a database that we can take with us. There's nothing that is tethering the 2 databases together. We can have offline access to this data. We can take it home. We can take it to the cottage, online, offline, whichever. The database, like ACT, is on-premise and in your data file. So you can access it wherever you like, okay? And then when you go back online again, you can refresh the information and get all the updates from the master file. And that's it. So thank you very much for joining us. We've covered the complete setup of a existing database on how to link and how to download and get all the information. So you've got complete accounting visibility within ACT and Qsales, allowing you for the first time to see your ACT contacts as customers. Thanks for your time today.